back to Call Time with Katie Beardmom. I was so honored to have Tony winner Beowulf Forret on last week. I know I could listen to him talk about set design forever or talk about the theatrical giants that he's worked with. So I hope you viewers feel the same way. But as always, Call Time is really interested in contrast. So we're going to be back today chatting with a friend of mine, a connection I actually made during COVID, if you can believe it, which I'm sure we will discuss, the wonderful Jake Swain. Welcome, Jake. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me, Katie. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Let's do a little vibe check. How are you feeling on this like near 100-degree day in New York?
You know what? I think I feel proud of my body on how quickly it just chose to accept that sweatiness is going to be the constant from here on out for the next several months. Like, I think the first few days of this like heat wave, I was really just frustrated and like embarrassed. I'm just sweaty all the time now.
Yeah.
But you know what? We're learning to accept it and just live in the moment.
Exactly. Yes, so viewers should forgive us. We both have our ACs on. If it's louder, we can't do it without the AC. I'm going to be chugging water. I'm sure Jake will be as well.
Yep.
So bear with us through this heat wave. I'm going to give a bit of background on Jake before we dive in so that he doesn't have to toot his own horn. First of all, Jake and I met, as I mentioned, when I was directing a Zoom production of Biloxi Blues for our agency. We're represented by the same agents, the wonderful Ricky Fishbein and Sean McKnight. I felt like we immediately clicked, partially because Jake is so positive and so intent on doing good work, which I'm sure we will also talk about. Jake grew up in Utah and went to Brigham Young University before making a splash in theater. He's worked at Goodspeed Opera House twice, first in Bye Bye Birdie and then as Will Parker in Oklahoma. And before we were recording, we were also talking about how he's teaching for them and all this other good stuff, which I'm sure we'll get to. I definitely think of Jake as sort of a type of consummate working musical theater actor, and that work ethic paid off when he made his Broadway debut in Mean Girls, the musical, and eventually worked his way up from an ensemble track to understudying the principal role of Aaron Samuels. So I'm sure we will discuss all of that and more. But I always love to start from the beginning. A very good place to start. And I'm wondering what drew you to theater in the first place, or to performance generally, and if there was a moment for you that you can remember when you were like, oh, this is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. I initially was drawn to theater because as a child, I had one of my childhood best friends. His name's Eric. He and his whole family was like a theater family. There was like, I think 7 of them, and they all were incredible singers and actors and did shows at the local theater. And I didn't do shows at the time, but I would go and watch them. And every year they did Christmas Carol, and my friend Eric, for several years in a row, played Tiny Tim. And I remember watching him as I was probably like a 6-year-old and just weeping in the audience when my best friend died as Tiny Tim. And I feel like that was when the seed was planted. And I was just like, oh, I love that theater makes me feel so big. I feel these huge emotions, and that was always just really appealing to me. And like I was always that way from then on out. Whenever I saw shows, I was very easily affected by them emotionally, and that felt good. So I think I eventually did my first show when I was 12. I did Hello Dolly in my junior high school. But I think I was initially drawn toward it because I was like, yeah, I want to make people feel big things. So I started doing shows in junior high. And all the shows I did in junior high were very fun, but I think I more so was casting them because I was just generally gregarious, and not that I recognized any real talents of mine. I was just like, I don't know, I'm just not too shy when I'm on stage, so it like works at this level.
Right.
So then I got to high school thinking, okay, I think I'm done with theater. That was more of like a cool, I can have a lot of energy on stage, fine. But then I ended up taking from a few happenstance things happened. And then I got into my first acting class. I didn't take any theater classes in junior high, but I got into my first one in high school. And that's where I was like, oh, like I like acting. I love like the process and the research and the discovery and the creativity and the collaboration. Like I didn't know I hadn't experienced any of that before. And then I got into that class and I was like, oh, this is a deep primal connection that I feel like I have to this. And it was from there that I really started to like think of this as a lifetime possibility.
And then were you a theater or a musical theater major in college?
I was an acting major. I got my BFA in acting. There was a really great musical theater program at my school that I didn't do because I don't know, the acting kids felt like more of my people at the time, and it just felt like that's where I belonged, which was definitely the right choice for me. I took a lot of musical theater classes on the side as they fit into my schedule, and I was really lucky with the musical theater professors were really kind to like let me into classes that usually would only be for the majors. But yeah, so I got a pretty well-rounded, I'd say, education at BYU as far as theater goes.
So it sounds like you, at some point in high school, you were like, okay, acting, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then when you were in college, did you know like the next move is New York? Like, how did you process that?
So in high school, I knew that I wanted to be an actor, but especially I mean, this is probably true for a lot of places in the US, but especially coming from Utah, there's like a strong sense of gender expectations.
Mm.
And being a man, there was this whole thing, you need to be the provider of your future family and have a very steady job with a good income so you can take care of your eventual wife and children. And I just had that narrative in my head.
Yeah.
And acting was talked about as a very unstable career. And there weren't a lot of men that I knew in my circles that were actors full time in Utah. If any, the people that I knew were women primarily, because it was a side thing for a lot of people that I knew. So I was really scared to do it because I was like, I don't know that I can, because I wanted to be a father. I wanted to eventually, provide for the kids that I still don't have. But so I was nervous about it, and I just felt like I needed to, like, some sign from heaven, from the universe, from God, that like it was an okay thing to pursue.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until like sophomore year of college, I'd already gotten into the acting program, but so I was in the program, but I still was like, I don't know that this is the right career choice for me, because I'm just really scared that I'll be a failure and not be able to provide for the people that I want to provide for. And then I went back. My little brother, who's also an actor, really talented, his name's Joseph. He was in high school at the time, at the same high school I went to, in The Secret Garden, playing Dickon. I went to watch him in it, and it was stunning. Like, oh my gosh, it was so good. He was incredible. All of the principal tracks were so good, and I remember sitting in the audience weeping so many times. I think that show is beautiful, and it felt like cogs in my soul finally just like clicked into place, and I just like had this like moment where it just descended on me that, okay, I am meant to be in this world forever. Like, in some capacity, this is where I belong. And it was a shift from before, where before that I wanted to be in that space and I loved being in that space, but I didn't know that that's where I belonged. And for me, I needed that confirmation. And I feel like it finally happened watching, for whatever reason, my little baby brother in The Secret Garden. And then from that moment on, it's just been no looking back, full pedal to the metal. Let's do this.
It's so interesting that your sort of transformative moment was like watching someone else perform rather than like a performance that you yourself did. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I have actually never quite clocked it that way, but you're right. It's exactly true. And I think that has been manifest in different ways, where I love performing. I love being on stage. I love being in front of the camera. And I love teaching, and I love coaching, and I love directing. I love being behind the scenes. And that's been an equally fulfilling part of my life. And I didn't realize that that would be the case back then. I was just focused on acting, but I love the whole process. I love storytelling, and I love the people that do it.
Yeah, even when you talked about it, it sounds like, of course, it's you're an actor and that's what you're meant to do in it, but
Yeah.
it's also for you about the world of performance and the theater. I mean, even if you're watching it, it sounds like it's a transformative experience for you. So you had this sort of transformative experience where you were like, okay, all in, go big or go home.
Mhm.
And so then I assume you moved to New York after you graduated school. So walk me through, because I'm sure, like, what was that first year in New York like for you? Was it like, I assume you were non-ec maybe? Was it
Was.
open calls at 5 a.m. every day? What was the vibe?
So I moved to New York 2 days after graduation.
Oh my gosh.
Just came. I was ready to go. We had a showcase with my program here in New York, and so I got an agent from that, which was great. And a lot of my friends, they came to New York for like a week right after graduation, and then they had like summer stock gigs that they'd already booked, or whatever, that they went away again for, which is great. I didn't have any gigs, but I didn't want to do, like, I didn't have anything I booked beforehand because I wanted to just like be in the city, which really worked out for me because in general, summertime for auditions for actors in New York is a little bit easier to be seen because a lot of actors are away because they're booked and blessed. So being non-ec, I had no like leverage to get into any audition rooms except for, like you said, showing up at 5 a.m., signing my name on a list and waiting. But I got into a lot of audition rooms that I wouldn't have otherwise if I'd come in like the fall or winter, which is great. So I got to know casting directors faster than I would have. I built some momentum. And then it was by, I think August was when I booked my first thing, was when I got like the call. I did Elf the musical, the national tour, non-ec, which was so fun. So I think I booked
Wow,
that
I
in.
didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a ball. I was the on stage swing and assistant dance captain, which was bonkers. You know what has been really crazy? So much of my career post college has been getting jobs that I have convinced myself I'm incapable of doing. Because I didn't grow up a dancer. I didn't study musical theater in college. I did not consider myself a dancer. I considered myself an actor. Like, I act. And then all of a sudden I have to be an onstage swing for a very dance heavy show. And the assistant dance captain, I was so baffled and terrified. And my roommate at the time, his name's Brian, he can attest to this. I would come home from rehearsals like shaking and frozen with anxiety. I was like, I don't even know how to approach being a swing. I have no clue where to start. I'm gonna lose my job. I'm gonna be fired. I just know it. I didn't get fired, thankfully. It's only a 2 month gig on the road because it's just during the holiday season, and it was the best. I loved my time there. I think the show was so fun. I'm still really good friends with so many people in that cast, and it was so great. There was also several times where I got called on to, go on for somebody's role that I didn't feel quite ready for, which was terrifying. But it taught me really quick, like, how to just be brave and step onto a stage. It was the first time in my life where I had stepped onto a stage, or really done anything for that matter, where I had no clue whether or not I would fail or not. I feel like for most of my life, I felt pretty confident when I tried new things. I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to be fine. It's going to work out.
Right.
I would go on for these roles in Elf, really not knowing if it was going to work out, which is incredibly scary. And, it built a lot of character and trust that, like, I can do hard things.
We had 2 weeks ago, Haley Fish. Do you know her?
No, I don't.
She's great. She's like a dancer, Broadway dancer, and she was a dancer in Cats and in Kiss Me Kate, but she was a swing in Hello Dolly, and it was the first time I'd had a swing in the show. So we talked a lot about how difficult that job is, and she described it similarly to you, that it's sort of like you're backstage and you're like, I don't know if this is going to happen, but I guess I'm still Coming out there.
I'm just going to take a step forward and hope for the best. The reason it worked for me, and I know that every swing has a different mentality about this, and I don't consider myself a career swing. That's the only time I've swung, and I really don't think I have the general skill set for it and like other experiences, but I did it that one time and it was a big learning experience. But what worked for me was that I really trusted the cast, and they were so supportive. I've never felt more supported by a cast when I would go on for a role that I was so scared to do. They would grab me by the arm and pull me along and push me along, and there'd be scenes where we'd be at a desk and there'd be something happening and be like, okay, what's next? And they would whisper it to me and I'd be like, great, great, great. So I had no pride around being pushed and pulled. I needed it, and I was so grateful for it. So that's why it worked, because there was just a sense of we're going to take care of each other, and together we're going to make this work.
Tell me about, I was going to ask you, because your Broadway principal debut was as Erin Samuels in Mean Girls, but as an understudy. And as I said, we've had a swing in the show and talked about that, but I haven't yet had an understudy on the show. So I was curious about that distinction and what your process was like for that.
Yeah. I think that, first off, being a swing for Elf prepped me for this. I've been an understudy a few times now for different things. When I was at Goodspeed, I did Bye Bye Birdie, and I was Harvey Johnson, but I understudied Hugo Peabody. And then, yes, like you said, for Mean Girls, I was Tyler Kimball in the ensemble. And then about 6 months into my run there, they bumped me up to understudy Erin Samuels.
So exciting.
So exciting. Oh my gosh, I was so excited. Okay, so this is what happened. The understudy that I was replacing, he was leaving the show, and it was like a Sunday. I think, I had like 2 weeks of rehearsals maybe, or like a week or something. I can't remember. And then I had after that.
And forgive me, Tyler Kimball.
Oh, yes.
Like in the ensemble, like an athlete.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. Yep. He's an athlete. There's 3 mathletes in the show. I'm one of them.
Great.
Yeah. Very, very fun role as well. And so I think there was a Sunday was my buddy who I was replacing as understudy, his last day on the show. Monday we had off. And then Tuesday was like my first day like on duty as an understudy. But there's 2 of us understudy, Erin Samuels. But my first scheduled performance as Erin Samuels was like over 2 weeks from that date. So I still had like time to like really get it in my body and like learn things. And I was really lucky that I had a scheduled date. And then that Tuesday, of course, you know where the story is going. I got on the train up in Washington Heights to head down to the theater. And as I'm walking out of the train, my stage manager calls and she says, "Hey, Jake, it's happening. You're going on tonight in an hour and a half." And I was like, "Oh, okay. All right, here we go." And I was just, again, like the Elf experience when I was going on for these roles, I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. It felt very similar, where I was just like, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, it's not quite in my body enough where I can be like, every time I'm off stage, I can think, okay, this is a scene where I'm insecure about. Let me like study up on this. I didn't remember because it was such a fast.
Have you had like only one understudy rehearsal or
one rehearsal. Like I'd had some rehearsals, like me and Becca Peterson, who's the dance captain with the stage manager. We had a few of those just to ourselves. And then I had one run with the whole cast, which was really great and helpful. But it just wasn't, when things are just not in your body yet.
Yeah.
At all.
How could it be?
Exactly. So it was just like an exercise in faith. I just like stepped forward, walked on the stage, and I was like, I hope this goes well. And it was great. It was one of the best nights of my life. It was so fun. I didn't kill anybody. The hardest part of the whole night was right at the end. Erin Samuels wears the lion mascot outfit, and it's like a big headpiece that it's really hard to see out of, and it doesn't fit quite right. And I was like, I didn't realize how difficult it is to see in that thing, especially when the lights are dim and everything. So walking around and running around on stage, and that, all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill somebody, or I'm going to walk at the stage. But nobody got hurt. but that was the hardest part, which is not too bad. And it worked out. And then I got plenty of opportunities after that to go on for Aaron. And every time it just felt so fun. It's so fun to like be a little bit a bigger part of the storytelling and to play with. I got to go on with a lot of the different girls that play Katie. I got to go on with Erica, who does it full time, and then a bunch of the understudies. And that was always really fun too, to like feel how that relationship shifts as each person steps into those shoes.
So I'm curious too, understudy versus swing. When you're understudying a role, do you feel like you're trying to give basically as close to a Kyle Selig performance as possible, or are you allowed to give a little bit of your own stamp?
Yeah, there's definitely room for personal take.
I mean, of course you're going like to the spots. You're not gonna like go crazy, but
right.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Casey Hushin, she is the associate director for Mean Girls. So wonderful. And she was really great about letting me be me up there. And that's something about Aaron Samuels. He's just like a good guy, and he's just who he is, right? So that role itself just lends itself to being whoever you are, which was a gift to step into. There was definitely, especially there was some scenes that happened like over some orchestration. So there was some timing that had to be pretty spot on. So that way you get through the lines and then in time to start singing or whatever. But yeah, I would say that they were pretty lenient on letting it be your own for me and for the other guy, my friend Curtis, who also understudied Aaron Samuels with me.
That's great. That's really great. And I think something that a lot of like non-theater people may not know is that in most cases, I would say the understudy, at least in big musicals, is still, as you say, in the ensemble of the show every day. And then sometimes you'll get the call being like, oh, you're moving up to principal. I think people think of it as like, as it is in plays, like you're off stage and then you get called in. But so is that the day-to-day of the 8 shows a week being an understudy? Are you always sort of like, do you like that you're still in the show every night? Do you wish that there was more like prep time? What is it like on the day-to-day?
I loved that I got to be in the show still every night. That was really fun for me. And it was always really exciting when I got the call that, oh, now I get to try play in a different way today on stage.
Was that the shortest notice you ever got that first time?
Yeah, it was.
That's so crazy that it was. Of course, though, isn't that always how the universe works?
That's showbiz, you know. There was some other, quick turnarounds actually. Now that I think about it, there was also a time where we had 2 shows Saturdays, and I did the matinee as Tyler Kimball, and then right when that show ended, I was told, okay, now you're going on for Aaron after this, which was also very interesting to like in the same day kind of have to shift that in your mind. And Kyle is so wonderful, who I understudied. He created such a great track and did such a great job with Aaron Samuels. So he made my job pretty easy because he's made such a great mold for all of us that kind of walked in his shoes whenever he was out of the show. And then it was really great because my friends who were the swings on for Mean Girls, and they were off stage most of the time, one of them got to come on and be my track, which was always so fun because there's several times where Aaron Samuels interacts directly with Tyler Kimball. So all of a sudden, like, it was me as Aaron Samuels interacting with what usually was me, but now it's my buddy Aaron, or it was Tovi, or it was whoever that was, and I got to like connect with them for a second, which is always just like kind of special and felt like a little wink between us.
Totally. And there are all these like, it's almost like Jenga with all the moving parts in a big musical like that, figuring out, and somehow it always works. I also feel like with sort of the understudy track in a big musical, I feel like is a way that a lot of people get their sort of break, because you you're in the ensemble first, and then they can sort of like test you out with the pressure of being a principal. I definitely think of you as someone who like did the work before making your Broadway debut. Like you did an Onyx tour, you did the regional theater, you did the workshops. But I know that a lot of people sometimes feel that it's sort of like a, you can't do Broadway until you do Broadway kind of thing. Um, and I'm curious, did you feel like your process before you finally broke through and made your Broadway debut, did it feel long? Were there moments where you were like, gosh, when is this going to happen? And now looking back, do you think of Mean Girls as your big break, or are you still like, I don't know, I feel like the same person?
It's a good question. I got Mean Girls, got my Broadway debut 4 years into living in New York.
Yeah.
I got my equity card a year into moving to New York. So I had my card for 3 years. So, I mean, everybody's career.
What track did you get your card on?
That was Goodspeed's Bye Bye Birdie.
Wonderful. Nice.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's career is so different, and timing is just like, there's no rhyme or reason to any of it, to be honest. Really, there isn't. So definitely there were times pre-Mean Girls that I felt frustrated and impatient and like what's happening? Why am I not why are things not happening? And there were times after Mean Girls that I've also felt, okay, when's the next thing, and how do I make these other dreams happen? And
yeah,
there is a sense of like, I don't know how to say this, but like maybe dissatisfaction sometimes with actors of like, okay, what's next? And part of that is just because of the nature of this career. You have to constantly hustle for your next job because every job has an expiration date, every single one. So you've got to be future focused to some degree. So it's sometimes a difficult balance to figure out, how do I also, while still thinking of, future me, and how do I continue to work, how do I with that balance that with a sense of presence and being in the now and being grateful in my body and aligned right now. So getting my Mean Girls felt definitely like a break in a lot of ways. I felt so grateful and honestly shocked. Like Elf, I had convinced myself that I would never be. The fact that my first Broadway show was as a dancer primarily is bonkers to me.
Well, it's funny that, because I obviously didn't know your whole story, and I knew like when I met you, I was like, oh, Mean Girls boy, and I think of it as, I mean, I've seen it. It's like, to be in the ensemble of that show, I think of them as dancers.
Right.
And so I'm very surprised to hear that you don't think of yourself as a dancer.
I'm slowly shifting how I see myself, because it's just limiting to say I'm not this. It's only helpful really to say I'm this, I can be this, I could be this. But it's definitely a shift, because most of my castmates grew up dancing, in studios and in class, and I didn't have that. I was very athletic, and I was into sports, which I think really helped me in preparation to dance on Broadway, but I would have never guessed. And when I did get that job, there was a big part of me that was like, oh, I tricked them. I tricked them to think I tricked them
Imposter syndrome
to thinking that I am a dancer and I'm going to lose my job in just a few weeks. I was so terrified. I don't know what that is, but the imposter syndrome is so real.
What was the audition process like?
I first auditioned for them like a year before I got it. And it was a dancer call, and I got cut right from the first group.
Gotta love it.
Right? I just was like, okay, I didn't get that. And then from there, I went in several times. Sometimes I'd go in for a singer call and I'd sing whatever song I brought, and sometimes I'd go in for dancing. And eventually I got to know the casting team, and they also were casting Prom on Broadway. Same creative team, same casting team, Casey Nicola and all them. And I got pretty far into the audition process for prom. Got a lot of callbacks. Eventually didn't get that. But I think that is where I started to like get more on their radar. There's a lot of similarities between the performers of prom and those in Mean Girls. So that was like end of the year, maybe I think 2018, that I was like in for prom a lot. And then from there, the casting team called me in for an invited dance call for Mean Girls in January of 2019. So I was back, I was dancing again, and this time I was more prepared. I was less insecure about what I was doing and more excited to be there. So they taught us to dance. They made a cut and sent people home that they weren't going to use for the show. I got kept. They taught us a couple more dances, and I kept being kept. And then there was a few callbacks until eventually, and we sang as well and all that. Eventually, it was 5 of us left. And at that point, we all came back. There was 2 tracks available for Mean Girls. So 5 of us, 2 of us were going to get a job. And the whole creative team came in. Jeff, Tina Fey, Nell Benjamin, everybody. And we danced for them and we sang for them. And there was also the Aaron Samuels understudy track that they were trying to fill. So we sang some Aaron Samuels stuff for them. It was such a great day. I felt really connected to all 5 of us that were there. Like it was just so supportive. Everybody was really, I don't know, we were just like grateful to get the chance to play for a day and to be seen for something that we were all so excited about. None of us had done Broadway before. And I didn't have an agent at the time. So I didn't have an agent to like be like, hey, how did that go? Like, can you get some information from me?
That's so wild that you were going through that whole process without agent.
Yeah, I was repless for about 8 months at the time, but it worked out. Casting, because I'd gone in so many times, they just reached out directly to me to come to these auditions, and I did not get the job. My buddies Daryl and Kevin got it, and I was like, okay, and I moved on. And then a couple weeks later, I was at my restaurant job at the time, polishing silverware in the back, and my friend was asking me, how'd that audition go for Mean Girls? I was like, yeah, I didn't get it. I felt good about it, and hopefully maybe I'll get called in for the tour when those auditions come out. And then literally as I was saying this, I looked down and I have a missed call from an unknown number, a New York number. And then I get an email right after that, and it says, it was from Beth Knox, who's casting with Telsey. And she was like, hey, Jake, please call Telsey. Here's the number. That's all it said. And I felt it's like my stomach drop, and I was like, so I was like, hey, I gotta go. And I grabbed my phone, put my silverware down, like ran into like the supply closet or whatever. I gave her a call, and she's like, hey, somebody else, a third person left the show. We want you for Tyler Kimball. And I was just like, what, are you kidding me? Are you serious? And freaked out, and then had to go back into work the rest of my shift. And I wasn't allowed to tell anybody because I was still afraid that it was like not real and wasn't going to happen. And so of the 5 of us that were at that final callback, 4 of us eventually booked the show, which was so incredible. My buddy, so it was Daryl and Kevin and me, and then my buddy Tovi also became a swing, which was just such a special thing. And the other guy, Jacob, is so freaking talented and good, and it was so exciting to be in the room with him as well. And then that's where it began, and then we went into rehearsals. We had 3 weeks of rehearsals before our opening, and 4 of us had our Broadway debut all on the same night, which was so cool. Oh no, one of us, my friend Christine, she had already had her Broadway debut, but it was her Mean Girls debut that night. And the energy was so electric. We all had a bunch of friends and family come that night, and there's a moment right at the beginning where Kevin, who was also debuting with me, we come out together and kind of go right down center stage and do this little dance move together and sync, and the audience just went just because it was like our friends and family that knew us. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is living. Like, people screaming for us because I'm doing body rolls. It's so incredible. And then we had a matinee the next day, and we didn't have friends in that show that came to like watch us. And I went to do that same move. I was like, they're gonna scream for me because I'm really good at the move. It was silent. And I was like, oh, okay. I just had people that love me that were in the audience. But it was a great day.
I have so many questions based on that. The first being, I think Mean Girls is it's a good example of such a special kind of show. And I think it's this way both in terms of its style, musically and dance wise, and also in terms of its casting. The reason it is able to give so many young people their Broadway debuts is because it's this giant community of young people. And even though it's a dance show and it's very dance heavy, I remember when I saw it, I was like, oh, Casey clearly like wanted them to be good dancers, but good dancers that feel like kids you may know in high school, and moves that reflect the kinds of dance moves you would see at like a school dance, for example.
Totally.
Um, and I think I mean, clearly, even though you are clearly a dancer, it's interesting what you say about like having done sports when you were growing up helping you, because I even see the influence of that in the choreography.
Yes, it's very Casey does a lot of really athletic
Yeah,
choreography.
athletic is the perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah, and like he also really is looking for people that embody the spirit of what his shows are about. You know, it seems like in his casting there's a lot of just like trying to find the right energy and joy for the room.
Yeah.
So, so he casts somebody like me who doesn't have the technique that a lot of dancers have, but perhaps there's something about what we bring to the table that match the energy and spirit of the show that he was trying to create.
Yeah. And I also want to ask you about, in talking about style, about genre.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so interesting. When I was looking at your resume, for example, it seemed like at the beginning of your career you did a ton more golden age stuff,
Mm-hmm.
golden age musicals, and then obviously made your Broadway debut in this very poppy, um, modern feeling musical about based on a popular movie. But now I'm also learning that you started out just in acting, wanting to be an actor, and I do know you do and have done a bunch of TV and film.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, does your heart lie in any one of these genres?
People often ask, like, what's your dream career? Like, what do you want to be doing
Yeah.
long term? And something I love about this business is the opportunity to do a lot of different things. Like there's a way to do this career where you just get to play and be so many different kinds of people and have so many different kinds of relationships. I think of like Stanley Tucci, who you look at his film career and he has played every type of person that you can play. The villain, the heartthrob, the gay assistant, like he just does it all. The comedic genius. And that's the kind of stuff that I just love. I love being able to be somebody different every time I get a chance to tell a story again. I think most naturally, as far as vocally goes, it's interesting that I had a lot of golden age jobs in my life because I'm much more of a contemporary singer, most naturally. I've got kind of a weird rasp to my voice and a lot of contemporary sensibilities that I've had to really tone down the times that I do some golden age stuff. But where I most naturally sing is contemporary. And recently I've been really, really loving TV and film. I've loved the different type of storytelling that is possible with the camera. And that's been really, really fun to explore recently.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure, I mean, we've all had to explore it more during the pandemic. And I also loved what you were talking about the audition process for Mean Girls, because it's such a New York theater story to be like, well, I was polishing the silver at my restaurant job, and then I got the call that I was going on Broadway. And I think, I mean, I talk about this a lot on my show, but I think survival jobs, for lack of a better word, are like a huge, huge part of the career that people often forget to talk about.
Yes.
And definitely like a necessary evil, but also something that I think you could think of as a sane making thing in an industry that can often feel insane. And I'm curious about your perspective on that, on the survival job scene in New York.
I've been really lucky with the jobs I've had on the side. I've genuinely have loved most of them. This restaurant I was working at I loved it. Like most of the servers there, we were all artists in some way or another. So there's just something about being in a room full of artists. We like understand each other.
Yeah.
That I genuinely loved going to work. I had incredible conversations, especially in the back room where we polish silverware. We could just polish and we weren't worrying about customers. We just gotta like talk about our dreams and fears. And it was so wonderful, which I know cannot be said about a lot of jobs here in the city, especially in the restaurant business, but I really lucked out. My buddy Ted got me that job and I'm just forever grateful for him for that. I also do a lot of nannying. I come from a really big family. I've always been around kids. I love kids. I'm great with kids. So I'm doing that right now as a side job. And I've done that since I came to the city. It's always been one of the things that I've used to supplement income, which has been great. Like, I don't think a lot of people do child caretaking unless they love it. Because it can be a hard job, but I have really loved that and been grateful for that.
And I assume that's something you had to go back to once the pandemic hit, which I'm sure, I mean, I think all of us experienced this in different ways, but you especially were on this sort of like career high, career milestone,
Yep.
being a principal track in some cases in Mean Girls, your Broadway debut, and then suddenly it's all gone and you're like, okay, I'm nannying every day. So
Yep.
and I think of you, as I mentioned at the beginning, as such a positive person, as I think anyone watching this can tell. And I'm sure there were moments where that faded in the pandemic, but how was that sort of transition for you, and how has the year and change been?
You know, it's been a hard year. You know,
Yeah.
obviously for everybody. You know, there have been long stints of just being like, where are all of the auditions? Like like TV and film especially is like started to come back in a lot of ways, and I've been like, okay, well, why am I not in these rooms? And why I'm ready, let's go, you know. But you know, the business is so saturated right now, partly because all of the Broadway actors are all of a sudden available for these jobs. I think it's saturated in a bigger way than it ever has been, because everyone is hungry and ready to
TV
be
film market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, it's been a frustrating time, but it's also been provided means and incentive to be really creative with how do I still make art and feel I'm connected to this thing I love. So, you know, I take an acting class every single week over Zoom.
Do you really?
I do. Mm-hmm.
The entire pandemic you've done this?
I've been doing it for the last 3 years. I did it before the pandemic as well. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just so amazed by that. That's like that's so impressive.
I mean, it has been a lifesaver for me. It's been such an anchor point. I'm taking a class today. You know, it's just like it's been so helpful, not only to like feel like I'm like keeping up on my craft, but just to feel connected to other artists and feel like, okay, yes, I'm not on set, or yeah, I'm not on a stage right now, but I'm doing something.
Yeah.
It feels good and it feels creative and it feels challenging. And then several of my friends from that acting class, we got together and created some practice groups on another day of the week. So I do a lot of that as well, where we'll send each other scripts and then we'll film a scene from that script as practice, and then we'll send it to each other and then get on Zoom and like give each other feedback and just try to like stay in the world. And then I also have a bunch of friends who are really good writers and producers and directors. And so I've been lucky enough to have been brought on set a handful of times over the last year and a half. And like in December, I got to act in my friend's feature film, which was just the most joyous thing in the world. Just the last 3 days, I was on set as a PA and as sometimes AC for my other friend's short film. I had another friend write like a Zoom short film. So me and her acted with each other over Zoom, which was really cool and wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. So I feel like I've been like so lucky because I just have amazing friends who have been creating their own work, and I've just been lucky enough that they've invited me along for the ride.
Yeah. It makes me think of your initial answer when we were talking about uh, you watching your little brother perform in Christmas Carol and being like, oh, this is the world for me. I mean, obviously, the pandemic is horrible, so I hate being like the silver lining, but it sounds like a positive that you found was tapping into all of these other ways that you can remain in the world that are maybe different.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? It's also, I mean, aside from the whole everything to do with my career and acting and stage and the camera, whatever, this has also been a year for me of serious self-reflection and inner work where, I finally got a therapist and a psychiatrist and like did all these things that have been like on my docket to-do list for years, but I've always just felt too busy to prioritize them.
Yeah.
And I finally had the time and wherewithal to be like, okay, you know what? Now I really need to take care of me, which has been wildly important and valuable for my life in general, and as an actor, creator, teacher, whatever. It has also really positively impacted those parts of my life.
As things open up more, I know I definitely feel like society is sort of opening up again.
Mhm.
Theater sort of delayedly so in the fall, but everything is starting to be. Do you do you think it'll be easy to take those things that you were talking about that we sort of discovered in the pandemic and bring them to the busy theater world that we used to be in, or do you think it's going to be like a tough transition?
I think we're going to have to be really intentional and deliberate with each of our choices. I don't know if you feel this way, but I spent some time with my family in Utah during the pandemic. And there's something about going back to a space that you spent a lot of time with in the past that it's really easy just to revert to an old version of yourself that existed in that space. So, you can do all this personal growth and personal discovery on your own in new spaces, and then also you go back to the old space and you're like, oh shoot, I mean, I went back, I reverted to like old versions of me, which can be really frustrating. So I imagine that there's going to be some of that when we go back into these jobs. It's going to be really easy for us to just go back to the old way of order.
And I think that's true of the industry too, because I mean,
Yes.
you and I are aware of, and I've talked a lot about this in my show, all of the overdue reckoning that we've had as an industry in so many different ways.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us have like the big question mark in our mind is like, is it just going to go back to the way things were? Or are we going to make some real changes as a community? And I
Yes.
don't know the answer to that yet.
No, I hope, I think it will only improve and not go back to the old way if like every single person is consciously working towards that goal,
Yeah.
which is going to be really hard because yeah, there's been so much like racial awakening and reckoning, and especially, not especially, but also in our business
Yeah.
with for Mean Girls itself. We had a lot of Zooms over this pandemic where we aired out a lot of grievances that were happening inside the building and tried to improve and shine some light on some tricky situations. And with the hopes of like when we come back, we're gonna be better. Now Mean Girls on Broadway is closed. The tour is still happening, which is so great. And I really hope that they get the chance to implement some of the ideas that we have talked about over the last year and a half. But yeah, we're not gonna be better unless we really work hard at it. And it's going to be uncomfortable because, our brains, we've got really strong, deeply grooved in neural pathways now of this is how that works. If we do it this way, we get results, we get money, we get whatever. But these grooved in pathways have hurt a lot of people on the margins. So it's going to be really difficult, and our brains are going to resist every time we try to carve a new pathway. Well, we've got to do it. It's time, and we all know it's time. But I don't know. I'm afraid that we might get lazy when push comes to shove.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a tough business that it can feel like if you get the job, that's all there is to it. Like there's no other work to be done,
Yeah.
or there's nothing else you should be thinking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope, as you say, I hope that that's changing. And it seems like a moment where we've all had this forced reset button where we could all work together to make those changes as a community, but we
Yes.
shall see. Um, I want to, before we end, I always end with an ending segment, but before we go on to that, I want to ask if you have advice for aspiring actors who may be watching.
Yeah. I think it's so important just to show up. There's a lot of fear in this career that you feel like you don't deserve it, or you're going to fail or whatever. But if you want it, you just have to show up time and time and time again. And that's going to serve you more than a lot of things. Show up to the audition. When you get the job and you feel like you don't deserve it, just show up. Just step onto that stage, just show up for rehearsal and just go for it. And if you fail, you fail. I would also say, this is right in line with this, but do things that you imagine a brave person would do.
Mm.
I think sometimes we think we have to okay, got to muster up whatever feeling we think courage is or bravery is, and then I'll make a choice that's aligned with that. But a lot of times the action comes before the feeling.
Yeah.
Just make choices that you think a brave person would make, and then all of a sudden you become that person. You become that brave person. That's the advice I'd give. And of course, I mean, everyone says this, but be kind, be kind, be kind, be kind. And okay, oh my gosh, there's so much whatever advice I want to say. Okay, how do I want to word this? This is a newer thought. There's a huge sense of desperation that actors have, and we feel like we're imposing ourselves onto others. Like, oh, I hope it's okay that I'm here in this audition room right now. Thank you so much for seeing me. You're doing me such a big favor by letting me audition for you. When, we're doing them a favor. We're helping them solve a problem by showing up. We're like, hey, you need to cast this role. You're trying to tell this story. Let me do that for you. Let me help you do that. All they have to do is pay us a little money, and then they get an entire being, an entire soul full of experiences. Somebody who can make choices and nuance and creativity and collaboration. That's huge. I think if you can figure out a way to stop apologizing for being there and start trying to believe that not only do you deserve to be there, but it's a beautiful thing that you're there, and nobody is doing you a favor by giving you that opportunity. The whole thing is just a magic opportunity to collaborate and create together. I don't think that was very succinct or maybe that intelligible, but because it's still a newer thought for me.
No, I think that makes total sense. And it's very similar too to I know that I have had this discussion with many other young women about how particularly women are trained to be like, oh, so sorry, I'm just writing, my apologies. And I've really tried to scale that back in my own language. And I think it's like a double whammy, because as an actor and a woman, I'm always like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't want to bother you.
Right.
But I think you're totally right. They had an open call audition and you showed up. So you're equal participants in that experience.
Exactly. How lucky for them that you showed up.
Yeah. And I want to ask, just before we move on to the second, because this made me think of this. You started out talking about feeling that you couldn't be an actor, or it wasn't a very realistic possibility because of the sort of gender expectations of where you grew up. And I'm curious if you feel that you still carry that with you, or but you carry it with you and it's sort of like, I've accepted it, or whether you've released it completely.
That's a good question.
It's a tough question.
I know. Let me check in with myself. Where do I feel that? I've done a lot of releasing of that.
Yeah.
I've had to, and I've been lucky enough that I've had several checkpoints of validation from this business of like, every so often I will get the job, which has been like, okay, good. I confirming that this is a viable career. And at this point, it's, if I want to be a father one day, it's going to happen. Like
Yeah.
and I'm going to be an actor as well. And
Yeah.
I'm going to direct and I'm going to teach. I'm going to do all those things because it's just so much of who I am. Life wouldn't be my life without those things. So I think where before I had such a strong idea of the pathway in front of me and what it was supposed to look like, that when I started making choices that deviated from that, it was really alarming at first and disorienting and scary because I was like, oh no, all of a sudden the path in front of me, I have no idea what it looks like. But now I just feel comfortable in that. I feel pretty comfortable. And this is I feel like it's really solidified in the last year of just being like, I'm releasing this like fixation on the future and what it's supposed to look like and how I'm supposed to get there, and just gently trying to come back into the present moment, coming back into my body and trusting that what's mine will come to me or I'll come to it. And I don't know how that will happen. I don't know what that's going to look like or the steps to get there, but I know that I want to be where I am right now. And I know that as I continue to step forward confidently into the dark, that good things will continue to come. And I think all good things are possible, that there doesn't have to be a this or that. And I also know, quick caveat, that like I'm speaking from a huge place of privilege as a white cis man. Like, oh yeah, I can have everything. But I do feel a sense of like, yeah, I think a family and a creative job is absolutely possible and definitely in my future.
And I'm glad you brought it up too, because I think sometimes it's like, especially when we're younger artists, like the question of family can be sort of like a dirty word, like not something that anyone talks about because it's sort of like a big question mark. But I think it's something more people should talk about, because whether you know or you don't know like what your life is going to look like, it's okay to at least want both of those things and to be factoring those wants into how you live your life, because that's part of being an adult.
Absolutely.
All right, we went very deep, which
yes,
is exciting, which I love. I hope you love too. This will be a little less deep. It's just sort of like an amuse-bouche to end. I call this segment the Thank You Five segment. So it's 5 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Glad you appreciate the name. Favorite show you've ever done?
Andrea's Got Two Boyfriends. I did it in college.
I didn't even know it.
It's a play. It's a one-act play. It's about 3 adults who live in a home for adults with mental disabilities, and it's them and their like caretaker at that home, and it's just beautiful and real and funny and heartbreaking, and it was the first time that I learned and experienced like making theater, but also like being a part of the community we were making that theater in. We did a lot of like, spent a lot of time in a local home for adults had those experiences, and it was just like, oh, theater can exist far beyond just like the moment on stage, and that just felt really important and significant for me at the time.
I'll have to read it. The hardest thing about being an understudy on Broadway?
It's the moments of, I think I've mentioned this, but not knowing what you don't know, like just being unsure of like, I don't even know what to study right now in these moments of real time. I've got to act because I don't remember what I don't remember. It's that, and the pressure of all of a sudden I've got the show to some level on my shoulders, and I've got to make sure it happens. So there's just a lot of pressure that can come from that.
Yeah. It's definitely a like, let's see how this goes moment.
Right, exactly.
The flip side of that, your favorite part of your Aaron Samuels performance, whether that be like a specific moment in the show that you do or a specific way you feel, but any one of those options.
My favorite time that I played Aaron Samuels was I'd been doing it for a few months, and then I got to do like 5 or 6 shows in a row with one of my best friends, Becky Peterson. She was an understudy for Katie Heron, and we finally got to do it together for like a bunch of shows in a row. We were best friends from college. We did a bunch of shows in college together. So the fact that we got to now do these 2 roles together, playing opposite each other on Broadway, was just absolute magic. I couldn't believe how lucky we were that we got to do this. It was so fun and special, and that was my favorite moment. My favorite scene is More Is Always Better. I feel like that's a really nice like arc that Aaron has throughout that scene and song. But yeah, doing it with Becca was tops for me.
That's so crazy to
Right?
perform the show together. What kismet. And I also feel like obviously it's acting, but I do think there is, when you have a strong bond with the people that you're performing off stage, I do think that it shows on stage and changes the texture of your performances.
Absolutely.
In a fun, great way.
Yes.
One thing you wish you'd known before you moved to New York to become an actor?
I wish I'd known that I don't have to try so hard to give people what I think they want. I think I don't know if that makes sense, but like I had this idea that before I came that like there are way more musical theater jobs than there are like straight acting jobs, like in plays and whatnot. So let me sell myself as this like musical theater chorus boy because I think that's what everyone wants. And there was a lot of good that came from that. I got a lot of jobs in that capacity, but eventually I had to like, about 3 years into New York, I had to reckon with myself and be like, okay, you know what? I've been playing up this part of me that is not my truest me and not the thing I'm best at or the thing I'm most interested in. So I had to really recalibrate and kind of redefine a lot of my relationships in this business with my reps, with casting directors, to be like, actually, no, this is more of who I am and more of the artist I want to be. And I wish that I had just started out when I first came to New York, trusting that what I have to bring, what I have to offer was unique enough and special enough that there was a career in that.
I think a lot of us try to like game the business side of the business by like marketing ourselves in a specific way. And it was a crucial moment when I sort of realized like, no, that's actually not my job. Like maybe it's my agent's job or my manager's job or whatever, but like my job is just to like be myself and do the work, which I think is like a crazy freeing concept.
Absolutely.
And I also do think that like certainly you're my age, right? When did you graduate college?
2015.
Okay, so you're a year ahead of me, but I definitely feel that when we graduated college, there was a bit more of a sense of like, you must be a type. And now everyone can be sort of whatever, or we're moving towards everyone can be sort of whatever. I hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope so too.
It would be great for us. The last question is a bit of a rhetorical joke, but as Aaron Samuels, does your hair look sexy pushed back?
You tell me.
Well, it's such a pleasure having Jake on. We will have one more special guest next week before we move on to a special episode on a soon to be announced show. And thank you so much for watching Call Time. As always, it's a pleasure. Have a great week.